In this conversation, Will Keyte and I discuss natural law as a means to peace, freedom and abundance. We get into the down-to-earth day-to-day reality of what it means to live by natural law, and also what's your standard of good, so you know what to guide your choices and therefore your actions. We also get into the British Constitution and how that is actually perfectly aligned with natural law, and that if the population was sufficiently aware of the Constitution and its powers, we could use it for purpose in order to achieve our freedom effectively. We touch on many related subjects, including what Will refers to as the shadow work, which is the necessary gaining of knowledge that everybody has to do in order to become a functional, contributing member of a potentially free society. The first question I asked Will was to do with people's attitude and approach to common law in the freedom movement, and their view towards their standing, their political and their commercial standing, their legal standing. Because a lot of people in the movement seem to look for silver bullet solutions, and they're either playing the name game and or using trusts. And what I put to Will was that, is this actually a part of any potential solution to our political freedom, or are people just missing the point?
Yeah, it's one that I have a regular rant over, as I think you've seen, for a number of reasons, actually. And I suppose the first thing to say is that people don't really understand what common law actually is. And so probably what we should do is just get that sorted briefly and quickly, because if they don't really understand what common law is, they're kind of going into areas that are sort of irrelevant, and they're not actually going to bring about any kind of solutions at all. I'll just lay it out straight from the start, is that I don't believe that there is an immediate or even medium-term solution in this regard. So my purpose of bringing up common law is an entirely different one from the way that other people are trying to bring up common law. So let's just get into what common law is. Common law is actually constitutional law. That's what it is, and nobody really frames it as that other than me, as far as I can tell. I don't think anyone else is out there bold enough simply saying, well, actually, common law is constitutional law. That's what it is. And therefore, if you're going to address common law and use it in any sense, then you would have to be talking about the Constitution. And the Constitution is the authority over our own government. And as soon as you start to begin the conversation in those terms, now you're going to make some progress, because they know that. But largely, I would say that the sort of campaigning law movement within the freedom movement doesn't seem to be cottoning on to that one yet, even though I've tried to raise this and been talking about it for 14 months. So what they're doing is they're conflating, to a large extent, common law with other forms of maritime type laws, or commercial laws, trade laws that were brought about for that purpose, for commerce. And what they're doing and saying is that they're claiming that that's what's being used and is live and active within our court system. I actually don't take that view, and I've been down all of those rabbit holes, and I went down them like years ago, probably 2009, 10, 11, around that sort of time. And I went into that when people like Jordan Maxwell were talking about it, Robert Menard, others in this country. We were talking about people like Tom Crawford, who I knew at the time, Guy Taylor, others. So there are many in the freedom movement who seem to think, for some reason, that I haven't been down these rabbit holes. I have, and I don't really see the evidence for it of any quality. I know that there's a lot of things that sort of suggest it a bit, and a lot of it sort of hangs together quite well. The story hangs together quite well, but I don't see the evidence for it. The only piece of evidence, actually, that I see that has any kind of weight at all comes from Professor Carol Quigley's book, Anglo-American Establishment, I think it was, or was it Tragedy and Hope, where he quotes the text from Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was the advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. And that talks a little bit about us being the vassals and how we are. Well, he goes into it's sort of slightly couched in technical terms, but it's quite eyebrow raising.
Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever by operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser. For not one man in a million could ever figure our plans, and if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America.
And that's the only thing that I've come across of any real, evidence, I think, or could be construed as evidence.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I just don't go with it. Now,
can I just interject?
There's a lot of repeated claims that go on. Sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject with the fact that what I remember hearing, and I went through the same period as you, recalling all of those sources as well. And what I remember being spoken of a lot was the idea that common law is just, do no harm, go about your business, and don't damage anyone's property, and that sort of thing, which I suppose touches on the natural law thing. But we'll get to that in a minute.
You are absolutely correct. That is what it is, and that aspect of it they get right. That is what common law is. It's a reflection of natural law, of natural justice within our system. And so the systems of law that they seem to focus on, they seem to feel that it's their job to unravel, even if we could prove that it exists within the court system, that they are operating under these contracts. It seems that they seem to feel that it's their job to just simply unravel that and think that that's, But the question that I always ask is, if that system were to exist, would it be legitimate? Would that be a legitimate system that they put in place in secrecy, not transparently? And they naturally say, well, no, of course it wouldn't. It wouldn't be legitimate. So I then say, well, why are you spending your time unraveling it then? Because if it's not legitimate, why are you paying it any value or any attention? Because it shouldn't be there, quite obviously. And
on that note, I think it's worth pointing out that when people get lost in the name versus the man, and all of this stuff to try and get ways around it, I've seen people in fact end up simply using the existing wrong system, the existing immoral system, to trying to twist it round to use it for their own benefit. And again, I think that's a fundamentally incorrect approach.
Right, and also, and I don't actually think that that's a real thing anyway. I mean, I've looked at the straw man thing and I don't see the evidence for it at all. A lot of it comes from things like capitis diminutio maxima, which is something that's written in Black's Law Dictionary, which is not even used over here. And it's not actually even referring to capital letters. Capitis diminutio maxima is referring to a slave status within Roman law, I think. But it doesn't relate it to capital letters. It's not referring to capital letters. And so the trouble is that there's a lot of sort of half-truths being put together. And adding 2 and 2 and getting 5, and the trouble is that because the evidence isn't really that good, why are you using it? You're actually just scoring a lot of home goals. Now, the most important point, getting on to what you're talking about, is that if you are doing all of that and focusing on these sort of technical aspects of what you think they might have done, you're actually ignoring the most important part of it, which is calling them out under moral law. You're kind of by inference leaving that lie in place and not addressing it, and therefore you're actually facilitating and continue to support the lie, the bigger lie that's already in place. And that's my biggest concern. So I think it's a psyop, actually, if I'm being honest. There was a really good article around the time of, I think it was about 14 months ago, I wrote another rant over this, just before things got very hectic for me when I went on GB News with Neil Oliver. It was quite soon before that, and I wrote a bit of a rant at that time. And there was a very good article in January that I referenced. Go back and have a look, if you like, which was a pretty long and very full article written by, the name, I can't remember who it was now, but basically suggesting that this entire thing was a psyop. It was actually a distraction. And that really what we should be focusing on is moral law. We should be calling this out, because under natural justice, if you are not addressing the lie, then you are contributing to it. And that's really what my message is all about. And the Constitution, when you get into it, and we will, is absolutely in alignment with natural justice and natural law. It really is just about the limiting of government and the elevating of the people in authority over their own government. And if you don't have that, and you don't fight for that concept and elevate that in your mind and in your hearts and hold it there all the time, you don't have that Constitution. It doesn't exist. So right now, in reality, it doesn't really exist. It's there technically, and it is meant to be there, but nobody is calling it and supporting it and talking about the underlying principles and the concepts that hold it in place, which are truths of the universe, essentially, or truths of reality. I think we should probably say. It's interesting in your email that you said that, calling it the universe or reality. I like it. Reality. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
You touched on the idea of natural law, and we'll unpick that, of course. But I first of all, I love the way that you've highlighted the real gemstone of the Constitution, and it's a shame it's not sort of formally written down. Maybe it is in latest form in the Magna Carta and all that good stuff. But this gemstone of trial by jury, which anyone listening, we won't sort of open that box too massively in this conversation, but I refer anyone to go and check out your work. The essential role of the jury is to sort of keep government and legislation in check. And I love the fact that you brought this proper role of the jury to our attention. It seems unfortunate that people don't understand that, and that the main point probably is that our population of England, of the British Isles at the moment, doesn't seem to be sufficiently educated or conscious of their responsibilities and unable to actually exercise them. I had an experience where I briefly encountered a jury, and I was trying to appeal to them with the concept of jury nullification, but it fell on deaf ears, and that was even to the extent that I was allowed to mention it by the judge. But yeah, so trial by jury, you've brought that to our attention, and it's a fantastic thing, isn't it?
Yes, and the interesting thing about trial by jury, though, is that there's a bit of a gaslight going on, and people need to understand this, because what's interesting is that they media, the powers that be, have put it out there for us to think that they've sort of elevated on the one hand trial by jury as being quite a special thing, because I think culturally, we sort of know that it's a popular concept that people sort of do understand that trial by jury is an important thing, and it's important for people to understand that even in the legal profession and the court system generally, they really like trial by jury. A freedom movement won't like to hear that, but it is actually true that actually largely people in the legal system actually think quite a lot of trial by jury, and they understand its value and its importance. But what they've done is a bit of a gaslight. So they're kind of on the one hand saying, you know, it's really important in our culture, and yet on the other hand, they're sort of denigrating it at the same time. And you can see that through works, things that have been written, you know, research into trial by jury. You'll see this kind of constant gaslight. You see it, for example, in the anniversary of the Magna Carta, where they put on a play in the Palace of Westminster, I think it was, I can't remember, and they were talking up the Constitution and the 1250 Carta and how important it was, and yet at the same time they're sort of pulling it away and undermining it and saying, well, actually, you know, we've rewritten that, we've repealed it, which they can't, by the way, they're not allowed to do that. You know, so you've got this kind of gaslight going on, and the important point is that they're gaslighting themselves as well. And I think the reason for that is fear, because actually, if you take the trial by jury principle to its extreme, to its furthest point, what you're actually saying, which is what I've been saying, is that you're saying that society is self-managing and self-governing. It's governing itself. That means that society is its own self-master, and that's anarchic. Okay, so what we're really coming to the conclusion there is that, in fact, the British Constitution, the English Constitution in its original form, is actually a promoter of a form of anarchy. That's kind of what it's saying. It's saying, no, government, you're not meant to be a government at all. And this is why I often I'm saying to anarchists that you need to get off your asses and jump on board and support this, because actually the understanding of what true democracy really is actually the elevation of the people as their own self-masters, and the reduction and the subjugation of any form of government to the point where it isn't really a government at all. That's what you want, isn't it? That's what true democracy actually is. It's not about this voting in elections. It's about elevating the people as the final arbiter of law, as an authority over their own government. And that's anarchic. So, yeah.
Maybe I can be a bit devil's advocate there, because is democracy even the right word? I don't like democracy because the concept of democracy, which of course is squeaky clean and shiny, and we're all supposed to bow down to this marvelous concept of democracy, but in essence it boils down to the group versus the individual, and of course it's a numbers game, and the group effectively overrules the individual. So it's anti-individualism. Whereas
there is suffrage,
yeah,
I think,
possibly the Constitution, you know, maybe it's another way of saying the same thing, but maybe does the Constitution, do you think, ultimately support individualism if we're a collection of individuals who come together in the form of a jury on occasion to exercise their capacity to nullify a piece of legislation and say, hang on, this is wrong, we don't want this, and in fact we're going to, you know, pronounce this verdict irrespective of whatever your rule book says.
Completely right. And you're right. But I suppose the point I'm making is that I'm saying that they've done a number on us regarding the word democracy, I think. So democracy was never really about voting in elections anyway. It is an aspect of it because it's about voting in a public servant into office. What they've done, though, is they've conflated the policy management of the country, social organising, through the manifesto of the party. They've conflated that with the bringing in of the important public servant of the Prime Minister. So by electing a Prime Minister into office, in the context of the UK, you are in effect choosing a package of measures that's then going to ride roughshod effectively over people's free will. So what they've done is they've conflated the two together. So when you understand that democracy isn't really about that, it's not about majority voting. It's actually about what in the early Athenian constitution was called the exousia rights, which is where you have that direct control over measures, over policy measures. Through the jury, through a representation such as the jury, on every single aspect of justice all over the country. And that direct control is what real democracy is. And so the reason why I go out there and use the word democracy is to correct that term. Because actually, if we leave that uncorrected, we're leaving a lie in place. And you are absolutely correct that actually this majority voting is an absolute anathema to free will, a society that rests on individual rights. True democracy actually is about individual rights. It's about the elevation of a natural law tribunal to sort out matters of justice. And so what we are talking about here is an individualist ideology as opposed to a collectivist one, which is in the voting in elections. And so I just thought I'd just nail that one down. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
There's a complication, isn't there, when the voter goes and votes for a package of measures, a whole manifesto, because when we look back, I mean, this gift supposedly from the Greek ancient Greek civilization that is democracy is supposed to be one of the two greatest things they gave us, reason and democracy. But the famous story of Socrates, of course, and the vote goes to the people that should he be put to death for subverting the youth of Athens or whatever it was. That was a single issue, whereas these days when you're electing a party manifesto, I mean there's all sorts of nonsense can be smuggled in a manifesto that you actually don't want to vote for.
Keep in mind also that went wrong in Greece as well, because this sense of this implementation of exousia rights and the authority of a jury essentially over all matters of justice was an early Athenian concept put about, in fact, interestingly, by an aristocrat called Cleisthenes. But the later great figures of Athens that we think of, Socrates, Plato, things get a little bit tricky there, and they start to shift towards that collectivist thinking again, which is massively problematic. And it's one of the reasons in my teaching, when I put information out or I run my courses, in a way, some of the most important material that needs to get out there to people, just to clarify the traps and sort of the ideological problems that people get themselves into, to clarify those things, is this difference between the ideology of individualism and the ideology of collectivism. Because really, in a way, that's what this age is all about. We're going to start talking really lofty ideas now about epochs. And I would say that this age that we're in right now, the post-Atlantean age, if you want to think of it like that, is really about the understanding of us as individuals, us as separated from what previously would have been more of a hive mind, where you're kind of this into a kind of homogenized consciousness. What we're actually learning fundamentally now in our lessons in this part of our human evolution, I think, is how to be individuals, but how to be individuals in a way that we can voluntarily adopt cooperation and collective behaviors through voluntary action. So, and that's the key. It's how to do that, how to be individual and self-determining and address your own needs and your own desires. And in doing so, you then start to become a rock for others, to assist others in your own society and your own community. Yeah, so collective behavior comes about through addressing your own needs, through being an individual.
Yeah, so, I mean, let's maybe move into natural law. And I suppose it's worth mentioning very briefly that's one of those great philosophers, Plato of the ancient Greek. His great work, The Republic, is essentially the blueprint for collectivist societies. It's a tyrant's dream. It's the ultimate state, and we've got a bit of a resurrection of that sort of ideology going on these days. But coming back to natural law, so you're telling us that the British Constitution, English Constitution, was originally centred on natural law. And natural law, of course, being sort of reality focused, would recognize the fact that the group, a collection of people, is simply, you know, the group is it's an abstract concept. That there are only individual men and women, or men as in the species. When I use the word man and men, I'm talking about using it in a species term rather than a gender sense of the word. So you know, we'd appreciate that there are only individual men, that there is no group. It's like the forest is composed of trees, and this is something that seems to get lost. And in today's sort of anti-reason culture, I think we're losing sight of the tree, and we're focusing on the forest. We're losing sight of the individual. The individual unit of humanity is one individual, and we can count them and put them together. But at the moment, we seem to be very focused on groupism, and of course, you know, legislation and the kind of government that we've got, I think, as a result of our philosophical convictions, seems to be focusing more and more on the group, doesn't it? And obviously that ties into the vested interests of those powers that shouldn't be, who would like to manage the group for their own nefarious interests. So that there's a convergence there of things. You know, our culture is effectively gone off track, and it's at the same time this seems to be taken advantage of by you know, sort of people up there that are pulling strings and have seized power to steer things for their own reasons.
And that's why I was saying, you know, the ideology of individualism versus collectivism is in a way is the key idea of our times. Actually, it's the most important intellectual concept that I think people need to grasp. That the group, and further to that, the authority or the purported authority of a group, or somebody else outside yourself, has that authority to determine what you should and shouldn't be doing, is a massive problem. And people need to grasp these ideas, because what that's stemming from is an artificial idea, is exactly as you said it. It's an abstraction. Yeah, but importantly, it's an abstraction of the mind of somebody else who's decided it for you, right? So when you have a group, someone has decided and identified what that group is. What is the common component of that group? Or someone's had to decide that. What's the identity of a group? So the key word in a group is the word that comes after the word of. It's a group of something, right? So it's a group of trees, which is the example that you gave. It's a group of human beings who are over 60 and have got some medical needs or whatever it is. So in other words, it's a group that somebody has decided you are in. And so when you form a group, some human being is having to form the identity of that group, and it's never you. It's somebody else doing it, which means that what's happening is that the pattern by which you are determined is being determined by somebody else. That's the problem with groupthink, which is what collectivism is really all about. Yeah.
So you've got you've got natural law. Then is essentially, if we unpack that in a moment, or I'll bat the ball to you to do that, is essentially based on the facts of reality, isn't it? And it's very important to notice that morality is a key component in here of the picture. If we remind ourselves we're aiming for freedom, we also have to factor in that we can't be living under a general system of morality that would have us all self-sacrifice to the group. Again, you know, the predominant, our culturally predominant morality, or it more or less synonymous with reality, in fact, is altruism. But altruism is groupism. It's all hail to the group. Effectively, it's okay. It's give to others, and that can be your mum and your partner. But ultimately, when you look at it in essence, it's give to the group.
Right. Always voluntarily.
It should be. It should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the key. This is the trap. So we end up with phrases that are commonly used, like "for the greater good." So if you see somebody using a phrase like "for the greater good," which happened quite recently, actually, in a group that I was part of, even in the campaigning movement, and I had to disassociate myself with the group because they were generally not seeing this, and they were using phrases like "for the greater good," and I was scratching my head and thinking, you guys don't get this, do you? You're not understanding this at a fundamental level. Now, that is an alarm bell moment for people. If someone's using the phrase "for the greater good," that is an absolute essence of groupthink. It's really dangerous. It's anti-individualist. It's fundamentally collectivist, and it leads to a kind of a downward spiral of implosion, an ideology that leads to self-destruction. So, getting into natural law, what we're essentially saying is that, yes, morality is actually is absolute. There is a system of morality that can come to be known and come to be observed. And what that really is we determine it by, and you'll like this because this is like, this is a bit objective, you know, it's kind of, and I think that this is one of the reasons why over the last year, these are the most fundamental arguments for this, is that this can be observed by looking at patterns in the universe, in reality. So what this is really about is what is known in the mystery traditions as the major arcana and the minor arcana. So the minor arcana is about looking at the psychology of human beings and our patterns and tendencies, understanding deeply the true nature of humanity, human psychology, if you like, and the way that we think, which is what we talk about. The major arcana is looking at the patterns and tendencies of the universe, of reality, and understanding that, how that interacts with us and where we get ourselves into difficulties and how do we judge difficulties in that regard. We judge it by the effects that it brings back on us, typically. So when we start to behave in certain ways, which we can define in a moment what those are, you're going to start getting back negative consequences from that, regardless of whether you have any man-made laws in place or not. So this is quite esoteric information, very esoteric information. It is the most esoteric body of information, natural law. And it sits at the heart of the occult, really. And the reason why we call it the occult is because, or we don't call it the occult, they call it the occult because they want to dissuade us from looking at this information. And they do that very successfully because people generally don't want to look at it. And the reason why they don't want to look at it is because it's not love and light. It's potentially quite dark as well because it's very self-reflective. It's about looking at our shadow. It's about it's being self-analytical. It's about looking at how we are drawing negative consequences back to ourselves, self-destructive patterns that we are developing, not only in the individual, within ourselves, within our own lives, but because we interact on a collective level as well, how are we also manifesting those self-destructive conditions and patterns within society and within our community as well. So that's really, and it has to do with things like trustworthiness, and the more you outsource other people to do things for you, then you're going to start creating those self-destructive patterns within society. So that's really what natural law is about. Yes.
I mean, my take on that is that it's essentially, you know, if I can step outside of the esoteric just for a moment, it seems more observing cause and effect of our behavior. If you act contrary to the facts of reality, it hurts. Yes. You suffer. Yes. If you put your hand in the fire, you know, you get burned. If you constructed some kind of vehicle that didn't hang together and you drove it up the road and you crashed in it, it would be because you didn't construct it according to the facts of reality and the facts of your requirements. So exactly. I look at the whole idea of negative consequences, pain and suffering as simply acting not in accordance with the facts of reality. So it's a very sort of objective and rational view of probably the same thing. I personally shy away from using terms that people tend to associate with mysticism and hidden stuff, because I want to try and draw people into reality, because I don't think it's that hard. And
Yeah.
when we start to look into the sort of mystery schools and the, you know, hermetic principles and all the sort of things, I think it can be a distraction in itself, because ultimately we human beings, I think, need to act in accordance with the facts of reality. And whether or not that's making a cup of tea or driving to the shops or designing a social system, a socio-economic system, we still need to act in accordance with the facts of reality. And the key point there, the key fact of reality is the nature of us human beings.
Yes.
And we have to remind ourselves that we're born, we have free will, as you say. We're born without any knowledge. Some philosophers disagree with that and say we have innate ideas. There's no evidence for that. But we're born, we don't have knowledge. That's why we go to school and university. That's why we learn things, because we don't have innate knowledge like animals do. But we also we have a conceptual consciousness. We can't just sort of look around and know everything from the self-evident awareness. We have to abstract and conceptualize in order to function. That's the nature of the kind of entities we are. And when you also bear in mind that we have to test the ideas that we come up with, the conceptual ideas, you arrive at a set of facts that determine that humans need to be free by virtue of their nature, by the virtue of the way we are. And this is where I think natural law comes into being and relates to freedom, because if human beings, men, can't function if they're restricted in action, because it's actually contrary to the nature of our consciousness. So that's my take on that.
And what you're getting to there is the sense of purpose of oneself, the self-purpose, and the drive that sits behind a human being is that we are most creative and productive when we are true to our sense of purpose, if you like. And in order to be within that purpose, and where what people sorry to talk about the mystery traditions, I want to get onto those in a minute, actually. It is your dharma, which is your sense of purpose. It's your enactment of your free will. And because we are all different, we are all, unique in a sense, that shows the need for that individualization of society, of the community, to respect each other's free will. Because if we were the same, then it wouldn't matter. It's our differences that shows and demonstrates the need for that individual attention on each of us, that we have to be our own self-masters to self-develop ourselves in the way that we want to do. But what I wanted to just address there is about the mystery traditions, because my understanding of the ancient mystery schools is actually much more objective and much more in alignment with what you're saying anyway. I think, a lot of people talk about esoteric information, but they don't add the word science after it. So what we're actually talking about here, in many respects, when we talk about the mysteries and the mystery traditions, is a bunch of schools of people long time ago, millennia ago, hundreds of years ago, whatever, who were talking about the very things that we are talking about right now. And Hermeticism, for example, which is the nature of the universe. The reason why that's not a distraction, actually, is because understanding how we butt up against the universe is actually much more subtle than people realize. It's important not to over-trivialize this idea, and I'm not suggesting that you're trivializing it exactly, but it's not quite as simple, this acting within the bounds of what the universe perceives as morality. Okay, it's a lot of people say, well, actually, isn't morality and natural law all just boiled down to sort of, do no harm, act with integrity. What is it? I forget what it is now. That phrase that we come out with: do no harm, act with honor, act with integrity, whatever it is. And people boil that down to very simplistic language. And at a technical level, yes, that is exactly what it is. The problem, though, that we've got is that we are making mistakes all the time. in ways that we don't notice and we don't see and we don't understand. So the mystery here, or one of the great mysteries, is understanding the human psyche and the fact that we have this tendency to drop into psychosis about things. We go into self-denial about all kinds of things. We act through triggers, and this is all to do with examining the ego and our own psychology, and how we are exhibiting behavior that we don't even notice, the way that we gaslight ourselves about things that are uncomfortable. Now, if you don't go into that serious self-analytical shadow work process, you're never going to get there. It's an absolute prerequisite. So the universe and reality is telling us, by throwing us lessons for our evolution, it's telling us that there are certain prerequisites and requirements for you to have a life of freedom and liberty. You don't have freedom and liberty unless you do the work on yourself and you take responsibility and you go through that healing process and that that self-healing. That's really what it's all about. I think the whole universe, the whole of reality, is all about throwing us lessons of contrast, particularly within this period of our evolution right now, because that is connected with the individual. It is about us understanding right from wrong. Can we recognize right behavior and wrong behavior? We're very good at spotting it in those that might be committing some kind of conspiracy, but we're not so good at understanding that we actually have created the very conditions, perhaps, and the dynamics at play ourselves, and we had a part to play in that as well. So what I call in my courses the micro lies, which is the ways that we lie to ourselves all the time. Jordan Peterson talks about this very eloquently, that actually a tyrannical society is one in which the people lie to themselves 100% of the time. There's a brilliant piece of video where he literally just says that, And so we've got a set of dynamics in society and self-destructive patterns that has largely brought about a condition where we are easy to manipulate. It's very easy to manipulate a human being when we are not grounded and we don't have what the esoteric traditions call the 3 pillars of consciousness are in alignment, and those internal contradictions are not dealt with, which is thoughts, feelings, and actions. What you think, what you feel in the emotions, and what you do in your action and what you say is in alignment, meaning there aren't contradictions between those things, and it sits within natural law. So that's another rant. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that, picking up the original thread there, I think what you're hinting at is sort of the necessity of a path of personal growth, which again I sort of simplify down to the practice or principle of lifelong learning. We need to gather knowledge not only about reality out there, but we need to introspect and we need to gather knowledge about ourselves. We need to monitor ourselves. And I see this sort of, maybe this tendency to sort of lie to self as, again, another manifestation of what I always go on about, our departure from reality, our fundamentally irrational culture that we live in, for reasons we won't go into here. I see our whole civilization as becoming more and more anti-rational, from real philosophical fundamentals, and it's rooted in a rejection of objective reality, basically, and the fashionability of subjectivism, because as soon as human beings start to perceive that they're in their own subjective reality, then things like truth and objective knowledge are implicitly sidelined. They're undermined. So it implicitly gives license to the individual to behave irrationally, to deny certain aspects of self, because if you don't look at them, they'll go away. They're not real. And this is the essence of subjectivism, is that if you create your own reality, if consciousness creates reality in principle, then truth and knowledge are undermined. It can't be otherwise. And because I see our civilization as increasingly less and less rational, and more subjective, effectively, it gives license to all of the crazy behaviours that I think we see. But just to come back to one point you made in there, that when we do gain sufficient knowledge, if people do the rational thing and embark on lifelong learning, it's not that difficult to come to the conclusion of the non-aggression principle, which I think is the the fundamental underneath the common law about do no harm, don't take anyone's property, don't harm their individual, don't mess with their contracts, just mind your own business, and everyone else will do the same. That this is essentially just the non-aggression principle. Interact with all other human beings by voluntary contract in everything, and there is, if everyone just did that, 99.9% of humanity's problems would disappear. So yeah, I mean.
So, I agree with you. You're absolutely right. I think there's a danger to oversimplify it, though, and not to recognise that there are some deep problems. Well, you said it. I mean, you're absolutely right. We are. I wouldn't necessarily say that the problems of that stem from a lack of focus on objective reasoning and because. Okay, so this is going to get into your important the subject that I know is a key focus of yours, which is the epistemology of reason, which is how we can come to know things, and the epistemology of belief, I suppose, is you could say is the opposite of that.
Faith, faith and emotion.
Yeah. Now, I don't think it's quite as simple as that, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I'm with you, broadly speaking, on this business of objectivism, and we had an email exchange, didn't we, about Ayn Rand and objectivism, and I had a foray into that and love it as well, actually. and when you have to make some important, you're putting out some ideas for people because it matters. So you need that because you need to show that this is objective and it's logical, and some of my most recent arguments within the last year and a half, I suppose, are the strongest because I've been within that and I've argued from that objective perspective and that logical way of. But having said that, I don't think it's quite that simple because our relationships are much more magical and mystical, and the way that we interact with each other is a much greater mystery. It's not based on just what can come to be known through logic and reason, and our feelings and our emotions come from what I think it's been disproved now, but what traditionally we think of as right brain thinking, and the right brain thinking is all about pattern recognition. And the ability to see the big picture, and it's much more about the magic and the unreasonable and the unexplainable, and this idea that and intuition, for example, and how we can come to know things in ways that we can't quite explain. And I'm not suggesting that I have all the answers for this, but I think there are too many things going on within our life, in our realm of experience, that can't be explained, but there's unquestionably we can observe it. There are patterns that we can observe that we can't put down using rational explanation, and it's what we call the feminine energy within the mystery traditions, which is the magic. It's in.
Can you be more specific about things that we can't identify rationally?
Yeah, so we get things like synchronicities, and we get you can be sort of, I don't know, thinking about a friend who you hadn't seen for 5 or 10 years or something, and then literally within the hour the phone goes and it's there. There are some bizarre things that occur, synchronicities, if you like, and sort of numerological numbers that come up in one's life that you think, my God, that pattern keeps coming up, and it's beyond statistically what would be possible. I don't know. I'm not thinking of some very good examples, but you know what I mean, and I'm sure that your viewers would understand where I'm going with that one.
I mean, there are definitely things that we don't understand, and
Yes,
I don't personally draw the conclusion that they're not understandable. We just don't know them yet. I don't know them, or collectively human knowledge can't explain them, and I put them in a very definite mental box marked unknown. But coming back to the left brain, right brain thing, I think this is fascinating, and it opens the door to a lot of subjectivist thinking and a lot of the sort of idea that consciousness creates reality. But I think it's a false dichotomy. I mean, yes, we have a left and a right brain, and yes, we can attribute different functionalities to them. But the idea of our consciousness is that it should be an integrated unit. And I think when we, particularly, you know, Rand mentioned the idea of thinking itself is sort of differentiating things, it's breaking things up, but then it's also integrating things. And I see the sort of left brain, right brain as a synthesizing, if you're using your consciousness correctly, your brain will be operating appropriately. And the right brain is I see is more about integration. You said seeing the bigger picture. You know, maybe our emotions are more centered in the right brain. I don't know. The left brain is generally attributed to being analytical, but to be you have to be analytical. You've got to rip things apart and then stand back, and then you've got to fit them all together again. And I think when consciousness is functioning healthily, it integrates the two.
Yeah, I mean, I have a concern about over systematizing. So this idea that things can be broken down into parts to be reassembled rationally, and as you know, as much as anything, like things are components of a machine. You see, I feel that that's problematic, because I don't think that our reality can be entirely explained like that.
Well, can I just interject? I'm not trying to explain reality like that, Will. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's important. So what I'm just saying is that that's the way our brains and our consciousnesses are set up to deal with reality. So I'm not projecting that on reality. I'm not saying that reality is any way particular. What I am saying, though, is that the nature of our consciousness necessarily has to do this. We necessarily have to form concepts. We necessarily have to achieve an understanding of the world outside us. So that's all I'm saying. I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Yes, no, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. You're absolutely right, by the way, about the work, the hemispheres of the brain working together. Because I mean, when I was in music originally, and I was teaching music actually, and you know, one of the things back then that was big at the time was this idea that well, any kind of artistic exercise, and we know this, but in particular, that what seemed to have this effect of bringing the brain most alive to me was sitting down and improvising. So some form of musical improvisation for me was the thing that most had the most profound effect on the aliveness of the brain. So you could sit down and do 10 minutes of improvisation, because you're being right brain creative, and you're dealing with patterns, you're dealing with rhythms, and you know, whereas the left brain is well, actually the rhythm is more connected with the left brain and the chopping up. The right brain is dealing with the sort of the phrasing and the character of the music and how you're putting that over and how you're performing it. But it's because you're using the two together that what that has the effect of doing is creating the pathways between the left and right side of the brain. So you're bringing those two areas of thinking together. Yeah. And that effect could be observed. It was quite astonishing, actually. If you sit down and do a lot of musical improvisation, you can sit down and do composing, you know, which is just like sort of more of an intellectual exercise on paper, or you could sit down and perform something that's already been written for you. But it was improvisation specifically, where you're doing kind of both of those things simultaneously in the moment. Yeah. That most seemed to have this extraordinary impact on you. You could feel it. You could, you know. Yeah. So anyway, that was a bit of a side thing, but it is about that bringing together of that kind of magical right side of the brain that we can't quite put a handle on quite, and the left side, which is much more of that breakdown, that analytical side, which represents the masculine energy within the mystery traditions. But
so I mean, relating this right back to natural law and freedom and so forth, maybe there was one more thing to mention with intuition, and I get this. Intuition is something where everyone brings out the idea of intuition in order to say, no, you know, there are other means to knowledge. It's very understandable because we all suddenly get that hunch, and whether we call it a gut feeling or intuition, let's call it all the same thing. It comes from seemingly nowhere. But you see, I see a very, very boringly rational explanation for this. Let me run it by you. But our subconscious, we have a conscious mind and a subconscious. Everybody knows that. You know, right now we're talking in our conscious mind, but all the rest of my knowledge is somewhere in my subconscious, and I'm not thinking about it at the moment, but it's all there. You know, same with you, same with everybody. But our subconscious is a store of many, many things we perceive. So, you know, if you were to go to an event or meet people or see something, there'll be loads of things that your brain will record, and many people have talked about this, that you're not consciously aware of. You're consciously aware of maybe a tiny slither of what your mind, your consciousness ultimately is exposed to. And I see intuition as simply you missed something consciously. You know, you might not have seen a particular event happen. You might not have noticed someone slip into a room, but consciously, because you were talking to somebody else, but your subconscious would have. So when you're thinking, gosh, you know, you're trying to solve some problem, or you're dealing with an issue, and maybe the entrance of that person into the room has some bearing on it. But then your subconscious, it doesn't have any means to go, hey, Nige, you know, oi, you know, let me tell you something. It doesn't have a means to do that other than a gut feeling, intuition. It gives you a feeling. It's trying to say, hey, don't you remember that thing? So intuition, to try and draw those strings together, is essentially things that we've noticed, our subconscious has noticed, but we haven't consciously recognized. You say, well, I've never seen that. I've never ever heard that. It's impossible I could have known that. You might have heard something on the radio, or you might have seen something out of the corner. There's loads of ways that information can get past your conscious mind. And for me, intuition is essentially that. It doesn't need, you don't need another world. You don't need God. You don't need a higher self. You don't need anything for which there's no proof or rational evidence in order to say, yeah, okay, well, that seems reasonable. And I don't know. I mean, that's my rant finished.
No, interesting. The nature of the human psyche. I mean, the other side to that is that the more subconscious we have, possibly the more problematic things are, because it's actually the subconscious areas that you know, not bringing them to the surface. When people say, you know, are you acting consciously? Well, actually, if you're not acting consciously, it's because you're acting in ways that you're not noticing, you're not aware of. And those are the areas that I go into about these micro lies that we tell ourselves, and the exaggerations, and you know, recharacterizing a situation that's more comfortable to us, because the truth is not comfortable.
And we should
These
be
are the
engaged.
kinds of ways that we should be elevating it. Yes,
we should be trying to make. You know, people talk about humanity's becoming more conscious and we're awakening. I don't see that personally, but I do acknowledge the concept that we need to become more conscious. And for me, that is all about bringing these subconscious things to consciousness. Most people walk around with a set of philosophical convictions that are informing their fundamental motivations, and they're completely unaware of them, but because they're in their subconscious. And
largely it is to do with the inability to face difficult truths. It's usually about fear, actually, that emotion which comes, you know, and if we don't address that, then essentially what that means is that we're all walking around in society actually doing damage to other people. So this is where we're breaching, going back to natural laws, this is where we're we're breaching other people's free will through behavior that we don't even notice that we're exhibiting. Yes. Right. So that's, being prejudicial in some way, or allowing our traumas to trigger us in ways that we're not spotting. These are the kinds of things that can manifest within society, and doing that will necessarily affect other people's actions from that as well. So we're sending out these kind of ripple effects into the universe in ways that we don't even notice. So it's a massive issue. It's a really serious problem that people are not addressing. They don't realize how much this is affecting the conditions around us and what we're in generally. But
there's a huge requirement for personal growth, development, gaining knowledge, becoming more conscious, bringing things from the subconscious to the conscious mind, in order for us to achieve freedom. And when I focus again on the freedom movement, the sort of health freedom movement, because they seem to be increasingly tied together these days, I don't see people really acknowledging that some of the fundamental ideas that we all hold that are actually opposing freedom. And again, I come back to mentioning altruism is one of them, because one of and this surely relates to natural law. Maybe you can comment, Will, when I bat the ball back to you. But if natural law is about us sort of operating in accordance with the way things are, and in accordance with the universe, or with the facts of reality, then we need a morality, because, again, philosophy is a hidden subject. Nobody knows about philosophy. It's boring and nobody cares about it. But actually, it's really fundamental and it's really important, because down there, one of the major branches of philosophy, morality. What's that for? And I mentioned earlier that most people just associate one particular school of morality, which is altruism, and it's synonymous with the concept of morality, but it isn't. That's just one particular kind, and the problem is that morality, the function of morality, it needs to be, it's a set of values, a set of ideas that can guide human life. Because as I mentioned before, the nature of our consciousness is that we don't have automatic knowledge. We need guidance, and we need to hear from our parents and our forefathers. We need to hand the baton of increasing knowledge down, because you can't accumulate it all in one lifetime. But we need knowledge of how to act. And this is essentially what morality is. It's how do you live a human life? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that we do have this thing called conscience. And the interesting thing about conscience is that we have it even when we're very young. And you can see that in the behavior as well. And that's so when you say that we don't have this knowledge automatically, I know what you're saying, but actually in that regard, we are instilled with this thing called conscience. Now I know that there are some in society who have that ability impaired somewhat, and those are the ones who are tending towards sociopathic and psychopathic behavior, which is more common, unfortunately, than we might like to admit. And interestingly, one of the flawed patterns in us is that we tend to allow people of that type to rise in society into positions of power in the power centers of society, and we allow that to occur. So some of the most dangerous people in society actually are. So there's an example of a self-destructive pattern, for example, where we outsource, aspects of our lives, and we're doing it to people who would willingly take that power. Yeah. But that was coming out of conscience, which is this idea, and it's the conscience that we use in that sort of process of shadow work in what I call the shadow work workshop, which is trial by jury. So going back to the jury in society, and one of the reasons why the jury is so magic, really. And I'm sorry to everybody why I keep going on about it, but actually when you get into trial by jury and you start to understand the magical aspects of it, you start to realize, my God, this actually is something quite special. There's something quite bizarre about the concept of trial by jury, and how it's like it's not known about. There's, for some reason, people can't acknowledge to the level that they need to, but the magic that is in it is just missed by people. You've got to get into this and realize that there is a healing aspect to a society that embraces trial by jury to the extent that it needs to. It's almost like it's got a self-healing aspect within it. And by the way, this has been written about as well. There have been studies done on trial by jury and the effect on the jury in their sort of civic mindedness of how they go on in society after a case that has involved them for a week or whatever it may be, usually something quite profound. And the reflecting and the processes that they go through and the shadow work that inevitably the members of the jury actually go through as well has this tremendous positive impact on them and going out into society as well. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It was actually one of the contributors to my website, commonlawconstitution.org, did a piece of academic writing. It was actually a dissertation for a criminal master's that talks about this concept that they brought up, which was alchemy by jury. So it was actually alchemy and annulment by jury, but this was specifically alchemy by jury as well, which is this healing through the use of the jury.
Yeah.
So when the jury in society is used, you've got that healing mechanism right at the heart, that you're empathizing with people. So it's this recognizing that we're individual, but at the same time empathizing as well, introducing the empathy. And that is the balance, or not the balance, it's the integration, if you like, between the collective thinking, or the altruism, if you like. It's not really altruism, because what comes first is the recognition of individual rights and us as individuals first. Then, through that shadow work, we start to understand, and because we're doing that deep shadow work, we start to understand the feelings of others and the discomfort of others and the needs of others through that empathy mechanism.
Yeah.
And that's where the collective behavior then comes from. That as human beings, we are social animals. Yes, we are. But we have to address our own needs first.
No, I think spot on. The jury concept is brilliant. It's a vehicle for self-growth, for personal growth.
Yes.
If only more people did it, it gives you an opportunity to step outside of your own world for a few days or maybe a few weeks and focus on something else. To be significant, to be contributing to a group who are trying to determine justice. I mean, what a marvelous cause! And most people rise to the task. I think it's a beautiful procedure, and yet, in all my readings of your work and so forth, and I celebrate this. I think, gosh, isn't trial by jury a marvelous thing? But then there's a part of me that's concerned that our culture, our civilization, has lost the capacity to use this beautiful tool. It's like watching a bunch of children walk into a sort of I don't know, a discussion, a debate in university or something, a bunch of 6-year-olds. Yeah. It would go right over the head that they don't know what they're participating in. And an intellectual debate in such a chamber could be a fantastic thing for people who are able to engage with it. But
intellectual and emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's on all sides, and it's to our detriment. And that, in a way, is why I come to the conclusion at the moment that, are we actually making progress at the moment as a society, either towards our freedom or towards our self-healing? And my answer, actually, just being honest, is not really, actually, at the moment. I'm sorry to say. No. I just don't see it around. Yeah. I'm just being honest. I just don't see it around us. And I don't see that the freedom movement either is being particularly helpful in this regard either, because what they've done is gone into a kind of sort of victim-perpetrator mentality, where they're just simply personifying the sort of the evil as the enemy, and they're going to just throw bombs over to the other side all the time, and it's just not helping. It's actually probably taking us backwards. In fact, I would say that quite often, I would say that the freedom movement is engaging in behaviours that is actually scoring own goals.
Yes, I agree.
In fact.
Great. Do you think, Will, that you know, we can collectively sort of become sort of part of the problem? I mean, some people, I've heard people say things that kind of allude to this idea that what we have out there in the world at large, in our form of government and in our cultural violence and problems, is a reflection of ourselves.
Yes,
a lot of people,
absolutely, entirely, totally, and I think that at the highest level, that's how reality operates. It is, you know, that natural law is like a mirror in that regard, in that it's a set of ever deepening moral tests for us that reality or life throws at us, tests, and the most difficult test for us is to call out immorality and wrongdoing and not sit on the sideline and just not talk about it and not acknowledge it. And to do the opposite, which is to brush things under the carpet and pretend that it wasn't there. Yes. No, you have to resolve it.
You do.
You have to. According to natural law, you have to look at that absolute and objective morality, and call it out and be honest about yourself as well. It's about both. It's not it's not pontificating.
No.
It's, you know, and the most difficult situations are like those ones where you're in a group situation. You could be in a room of 3 or 4 people and, you know, somebody ends up kind of gaslighting somebody else or whatever. It's absolutely up to us to call that out and say, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that, actually.
Yeah.
You know, or you're telling yourself why you're going to do something policy-wise in your business meeting or whatever it is. And you need to say, no, actually, you're just telling yourself a lie. That's not the reason why you're putting that policy in place in your business. If you're being honest with yourself, actually, is it?
Yeah.
It's, you know,
I agree.
It's being a damn nuisance.
Yeah, calling out is really important. But to me, this raises the question of what is the standard of the good? What is the standard of what is moral? So if we come back to as I mentioned, the morality is there as a set of guidelines for how to live. Well, and implicitly the concepts of right and wrong are embedded in that idea. So if you're trying to live, what is the right way to live and what is the wrong way to live? And this is you know, essentially how it boils down. So there needs to be a standard. How do you know what is right and how do you know what's wrong? And traditionally, of course, we're all just sort of told, I was raised to believe, well, you just know. And you mentioned your conscience, and I agree that that's a component of it. But I also think that it's really important to have an explicit standard. How do you know what is good? And this is something where Rand really helped me. She gave me the idea that the standard of the good is human life. My human life is my standard of the good. So any action that I perform that is pro my life is good, and any action that I perform that is negative to my life is the bad. And what people immediately get stuck on, of course, is, well, that means you barge into the queue and you grab the biggest portion of the meal and all that. But that isn't. That's again, that's not seeing the big picture. You have to zoom out. And if I look at my life is in its entirety, it's entirely in my self-interest to get on good terms with all people, to be honest in all my contracts. These are essentials for a successful life, and therefore they are the good.
Right, and also not to muddle that up. Being good is not to muddle it up with being nice. Right. So being agreeable and nice is about giving way on things that you don't agree with. Right. So what we're really talking about is being honest.
Yeah.
There's a difference. Yeah. So
and identifying what the good is.
What that ultimately. Yes. And what the good is being honest. So being kind to others around you sometimes means being honest, and being honest sometimes means not actually being nice, right? Because actually, and this is an interesting, we're getting into the subtleties of it a little bit more now, which is what I love, actually, what I get into in my courses with the micro lies and stuff, is that you're getting into stuff to do with the fact that some of the nicest people, for example, are actually the most dangerous because they're actually the ones that are most dishonest, either to you or to themselves, right? Yeah. Because what's happening there is that they're reducing their authenticity. You see, that's the key is are you being authentic?
Yeah.
because when you're authentic, it means that you're readable by other people.
Yeah.
Now, as soon as you become readable by other people, it means that you're dependable upon, right? You can be depended upon. You can become the rock of your community if you're honest, if you're authentic. Okay, if you're being too nice, you're not dependable. You're actually untrustworthy. So right. So now we're getting into the shadow stuff. We're getting into the complexities of human psychology and the ways that we start to lie to ourselves. Brené Brown, for example, talks about a number of subtle concepts, but one of them, and one of the most horrifying, is the vault, which is this idea that, you know, if you sidle up to somebody that you like and you gossip to them about someone else's, you know, or their marriage is falling apart or whatever it is, you're not picking up on the fact that the person that you're sidling up to and chumming up with might now look at you as being untrustworthy because you're giving away information that isn't yours to give away. So there are all kinds of ways that we don't notice, that we don't, and that's really difficult. And you start getting into patterns of human behavior at a much more subtle way, that you start to realize, oh my God, we're getting this kind of stuff wrong all the time, aren't we? Yeah, we are. Absolutely, we are.
Absolutely.
So,
So I mean, this idea of a standard of the good for morality is something that really culturally we don't have, because again, we have just a cultural synonymity of morality with altruism, which is just about do stuff for others. But that's all it says. It says give up your stuff for others, work at the soup kitchen, go and help other people, give your money to charity or a 10% tithe of it or whatever you like to call it. But it doesn't, this morality, this moral code doesn't actually tell you anything about what to do.
No, it doesn't.
All it says is give up stuff and help other people. Well, it's bloody useless, really. It amounts to a non-moral code. It amounts to a moral vacuum.
I always forget whether the term, and you can tell me, whether altruism means doing good for others in a group setting by force. Is that by coercion? Is that
no, not necessarily. Altruism was a term coined by Auguste Comte, and it's basically translated to otherism, being other orientated.
Right.
But, and the implication, because we're talking about a moral code of altruism, that the standard of the good is implicitly behavior to the benefit of others. That is the standard. That's the implicit standard of the good. So it morally calls upon you to give up your values to others and your time, your money. So there is the implication of a moral obligation that you are good when you do that, and you're bad when you think about yourself. You're bad when you retain your resources and try to use them wisely. You're bad when you are careful with your time and who you will give it to. So I mean, again,
you are not, as going back to what I said about, you are not dependable upon as a member of the community if you haven't addressed your own needs. If you don't address your own stuff. And in addressing your own stuff, it's when you start to find ways in which you want to help others anyway. So this idea, this trap that in society that we've fallen into, and people really need to grasp this, that individualists are somehow inherently selfish. No, that couldn't be more incorrect. It's absolutely wrong that individualists are, they recognize the importance of helping others voluntarily, but the virtue lies in doing it because you want to, because you've come across a situation where you've recognized that you can assist in some way, and then you want to do it, and you'll enjoy that, and that's great, and so much more comes that you get a synergistic effect in that regard.
I agree.
But going back to collectivist thinking, which is where society sets up a rigorous system that requires you to give of yourself in some way that's predetermined by others, it couldn't be more evil, couldn't be more wrong.
But it rests squarely on altruism. And the problem is that the collectivists can say, hey, look, altruism. This proves that we're right. And this is kind of my big point. You know, and I have to pick up on something you say there about the concept of selfishness. I think we need to reclaim, because this is a fundamental duff steer. As we all know, everybody knows, it's one of those things that everybody knows, that it's wrong to be selfish. But what is it? What does it mean to be selfish? It means to be self-interested. It means to be interested in your own life, your own, you know, your own everything about yourself. It's the fundamental, you know, thing that's required by human life. But it's been turned upside down to be called evil, and this is again because of altruism.
It's taken on other connotations of meaning, and you know, and well, more towards self-centeredness. You know, I mean, that's another one.
But it's self-centeredness. Should
be self-centered.
You should be.
It should be centered.
I mean, people who do meditation, you know, you're sitting there. What are you if you're not self-centered? I mean, and this. I mean, I think it's such an important thing where these words have been co-opted and they've been inverted in meaning, so that now everybody around us will go, "Oh yes, mustn't be selfish. You mustn't be self-centered." In fact, you need to reclaim. We all need to reclaim the meaning of these concepts and realize that being self-centered and being selfish is the good. Now that is really politically dodgy to say that, and you know, if you stand up and say, hey, we all need to be selfish, we're going to get shot down. But I mean, I do say that. Unfortunately, you have to put the word rational in front of it. You shouldn't need to. It should be a redundancy, but you have to say rationally self-interested. Because this is what freedom, just to bring this right back to freedom and natural law, there's no way we can, I don't think there's any way that we can aspire to a free culture, civilization, without all being rationally self-interested. If we are still wedded to this nonsense morality of altruism, which gives you no guidance how to live your life, it just tells you to give everything up. Well, that's a sop to collectivism and to government and to the state.
I would agree with that. Yeah, totally.
So it has to be turned upside down. We need to, and this is another dirty word. We need a morality of rational egoism, I dare say. And again, we're not supposed to be egoistic, or is it egotistic? I'm not sure. But I think, again, the proper definition or the proper understanding of the concept of being egoistic is that you're sensibly aware of self.
Right, and absolutely, because then that's balancing your ego. Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, because I mean, I'm not a psychologist, and so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am as well. But I guess what we're saying is that the human ego is amazing, and it's part of our drive, and it's part of who we are as an individual. But that has to be refined and balanced. That ego has to be in its ideal form to make us serve ourselves, but serve others too. As a result of that, as being authentic, being an authentic individual. But I completely agree. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there, but it's so unpopular to say this, and it feeds into the concept of capitalism, another dirty word. We're all supposed to revile capitalism. It's evil, but in fact, capitalism is simply self-ownership of property, and it's negotiation and trade. It's not nicking things. It's not taking and confiscating and you know, expropriating people's resources. It's hey, you keep your stuff, I'll keep mine, and we'll engage by trade, negotiation, and voluntarism. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot in this idea that egoism and to be rationally self-interested is the evil. And this is a major idea I got from Rand, of course. Most people will recognize this is Randism coming out. But I don't identify with the personality. It's just a good idea. She just identified that freedom is incompatible with altruism. And I totally agree with her. And this comes down to natural law again, because if we're trying to you know, identify natural law and behave commensurate with natural law, then, you know, behaving commensurate with reality, with the universe, with our own nature as human beings, we need to come up with a rational morality, because again, this harping back to philosophy as a really important subject, most people are unaware that a system of morality or ethics, kind of synonymous terms, a system of ethics gives rise to a system of politics, which is another branch of philosophy, and from a system of a morality of a morality of altruism, that inevitably leads to a politics of collectivism. It can't do anything else, because it says, hey, everyone, you must sacrifice your stuff, give it up to the group, all hail the group. And so that naturally leads and plays into the hands of collectivists. Whereas rational egoism and the idea of being rationally self-interested, taking interest in your own affairs first, taking responsibility for every aspect of your individual life, that is the morality, and the only morality, in my view and in Rand's view, that can possibly lead to freedom.
And one thing I would say on that is that, and I completely agree with you in principle, but I would say that I think what you were hinting at there is that we need to come up with a system that is, maybe you weren't, I don't know, I've got that wrong, but where we mark down and write down what those boundaries that we observed within the universe in natural law, so that we can determine, in a physical sense, in a writing sense, maybe, what that morality is. In other words, you're trying to write the law. Now, the problem with that is that you're getting out of this, or you're ignoring the fact that we having done this shadow work and created a balanced ego and become a self-master within ourselves, which is what I think reality requires of us. You're then, in a sense, outsourcing to a code that is then written down through a kind of negotiated agreement between.
Not really.
I actually find the law more powerful when it's left unwritten, and I've come to that. You would agree with that?
Yeah, I totally. I don't agree. Anything has to be written down. I mean, the non-aggression principle doesn't need to be written down. The non-aggression principle is the absolute fundamental of human moral behavior, and what it does, of course, is that it leaves the capable and the efficacious and those who've bothered to gain knowledge, it leaves them with an advantage, because now, okay, reality demands that I gain knowledge. Well, of course it does, because you've got to know how to live. You've got to know how to do some work so you can get some money. You've got to be efficacious, meaning you've got to be functional. You've got to be able. And the thing about this whole non-aggression principle is that it leaves those who, remember again, we have a volitional consciousness. We have free will. We can choose to think and gain knowledge or not. And this non-aggression principle effectively punishes those who sit on their arse and refuse to help themselves, who won't gain knowledge, the people who will evade, the lazy, and indeed the parasites. It gets all the parasites and it disassociates them from you and me, because hey, we're all non-aggressing. That means you're up to you and I'm left up to me. And effectively, it reinforces this natural law necessity for us to do the shadow work, to gain knowledge, to become efficacious, to grow, to learn. Suddenly the individual is required to get off one's arse and live and do that which is right. And so the moral code doesn't really need to be written down. The bottom line is non-aggression, but it also does require, and Rand goes into this with her 7 principles of morality. You know, there are certain basic principles you need to live by. You need to be productive. You need to think. You need to be rational. You know, you need to be independent. You need to you need to practice integrity. You need to be honest. You know, these are reality dictated principles that end up governing human life.
Which we understand through our faculties at all times of the day. We're doing it all the time, and it's that, you know, rather than consulting a piece of paper that someone else has written, which is highly dangerous. Because the freedom movement's really into this as well. Because people ask me about the Constitution. And one of the power, I've come to understand and realize that the power of the English law tradition lies in the fact that the 1215 Magna Carta, which is kind of our constitution, or is it? You know, actually, is it our constitution? Because the Constitution existed before that as a set of ideas. It's a set of principles. which is exactly what you just said. That's what it is. And people get sort of a little bit disappointed and say, oh, you mean it's not written down? Well, it is written down, actually. It's not codified. But the principles by which we should live, which is the Articles of Common Law, so coming right back to where we started, the Articles of Common Law in the Constitution, in the 1215 Magna Carta, which is not all of it, by the way, it's just parts of it, are constitutional principles that were written down that agree with natural justice. They agree with the things that you've just talked about. Basically agreeing with having a community based on individual rights and individualism. And that's the power of the English Constitution, is that most constitutions don't do that. The difference of a common law-based constitution or a democratic constitution, if you understand the true meaning of the word democracy, is that it is in alignment with natural justice, and it is in alignment with elevating the individual within society, not the collective.
Yeah.
And that's why the English Constitution is the magic that it is, and people need to grasp it and realize actually it's about something much deeper than the Constitution. You know, the Constitution's great, you know, but all the things that we've talked about today, natural law, consciousness, shadow work, those are the really important things. But the lovely thing about the Constitution is that it gets you there. It's like a shortcut. It's not even a shortcut. It's beyond that as well. But it's like a template for taking all of those fundamentals and saying, right, well, here's a way that you can organize yourselves and govern yourselves in a way that gets you there, gets you where you want to be. And really, in a way, it's actually the only solution that I think has ever existed in a man-made form that leads you towards those ideologies and philosophies that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost, the Constitution is a beautiful thing, and I'm very grateful for you and your work, Will, in bringing clarity to it for us all. But it's almost as though us English people or British people or whatever word you use, we don't deserve it. We're not worthy of it, are we? We're not. No. We're not up to the Constitution. We're not there, and that I find almost more troubling than anything, because it's like we're not able to reach up and grab the life ring that is there for us. Politically speaking, you could say, it's like we've sunk too low to even reach it, which is a great shame. Yeah, bit of a depressing note to.
Yeah, no, it is, and that's often why I say, when people say to me, "Are we getting there?" You know, well, no, we're not really. But we could, you know,
we could indeed,
and actually embracing that and those ideas that sit underneath it, we probably could make progress quite quickly, actually.
Yeah.
But those who are obsessed with conspiracy, I think, are largely not the people who are going to see it necessarily first. And I'm not saying it's not good to see conspiracy and to recognise that. Obviously, it is. Of course, it is. But I do find sometimes that even what we rather arrogantly call the normies, who haven't recognised the broad brush conspiratorial reality of our world that we live in, sometimes are actually more astute, sometimes, about some of these deeper themes. And so I've kind of gone through the conspiracy thing, and I've come out the other side of it, you know, and I'm reconnecting with those that aren't perhaps within the freedom movement more, and I'm addressing that. Yep. And in fact, actually, I've got a talk in Foy in Cornwall, actually, on the 27th of April. And in that, I will be talking about the Constitution in much more of a mainstream sense. In that regard, I'm going to bring up some of these things, and I'm not going to get deliberately too conspiratorial about these things and raising those issues.
No,
because I actually don't necessarily think it's that helpful in some regards.
No,
at a much
I agree.
Deeper level, I think we reach people much more fundamentally through the things that we've talked about today.
I think it's best to reach people where they are, as it were, rather than where they're not. And I would agree it can be counterproductive to talk about conspiratorial things. I think when people are ready, it is essential to know the facts of the world we live in, and a lot of the sort of these more conceptual ideas that are further out there, you know, sort of economics and politics. It's not exactly in your neighborhood. It's not exactly in your kitchen.
Yeah.
You can't see it, touch it, smell it. And these conceptual ideas are you know, we are misled on a lot of them, but there's no point in upending somebody's understanding of reality and causing a load of cognitive dissonance when you're trying to sort of give them a leg up to understanding.
Yeah.
But you mentioned rights there, and I think rights is the key concept that maybe we should all focus on in the freedom movement, particularly. Because rights is the bridge between morality and politics. I mean, rights as a concept, the idea of being left alone to act on your judgment.
Yeah, I mean, it's right behaviour. Your rights is behaviour that is determined by natural law, by the limits of immoral behaviour. So, you know, it's one of the things in esoteric. The mystery traditions is that they talk about apophasis, which is where you put things in the inverse, in the negative. You describe something by saying what it isn't. So you put it in the apophatic. So to describe your rights is sometimes more straightforward to say what the limits of those rights are at the point when you stray into immoral behavior, when you stray into what you shouldn't, what your wrongs are.
Yeah.
So your rights is what's inside the boundaries, the boundary points, and outside that is where you're straying into wrong behavior. So defining right and wrong behavior is what gives you your rights, and that's the study of natural law. That's Absolutely. Where we're going with that.
Yeah, it ties back into the rational morality I was talking about. Gosh, well, we've covered a huge amount of ground, haven't we? And it's beautifully. It's beautifully all under the heading of natural law, really, and again, you know, I feel compelled to repeat my stance on it. I see natural law as just human beings attempting to live by the facts of reality, to identify them correctly about ourselves and about the world out there and about everything we need to know about, and then putting that into practice according to a rational standard of morality, essentially.
I would completely agree with you, and actually that's the way into it. I would argue actually that it is more complex than we think, but you can get to that complexity, you know, and you know, it is the danger of putting it too simply is that people just think, oh, I know that, it's fine then. Yeah, and they're not spotting the dangers that we've talked about today. Yeah. That actually, the more you get into the esoteric subject of natural law, the more you begin to realise, actually, wow, there is quite a lot to this. In fact, and that living morally is yes, it is by reality. You're absolutely right, but it's just. People need to bear in mind that that's a harder thing to achieve than we might think, and that there are a lot of layers to this, quite surprising number of layers to this. Yeah, that you wouldn't first get into it. And I'm a little bit tired of the freedom movement generally saying, "Oh yeah, natural law, yeah, right," and just throwing the term around. There's a lot of that going on actually, without really understanding what those terms mean. And I sit there and I look at the people and I think. Yeah, but you don't really know what natural law is. I can tell you don't because of the things that you're saying, you know. And people really need to get off their arse, actually. Sorry about this. You know, people say, oh, it's all about natural law, isn't it? Yeah, well, what do you know about natural law? What have you listened to? What material have you listened to? What have you looked at? You know, get into that because actually if you don't, you're not going to make progress. Yeah. And there's a dishonesty there, which I'm getting a bit tired of, actually. But yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, I mean, maybe we should wrap it up here just for now. Please, if there's any other closing comments that you'd like to make, obviously we have touched briefly upon your next talk. You know, so revise that. Please tell everybody about your two websites. And yeah, any closing comments?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nigel. It's been great. I've enjoyed it hugely. I don't actually get to speak to many where we can get into the subjects at this level, actually. So it's just been great to do that. It really is. Likewise. So my websites, are www.commonlawconstitution.org. It's not really my website, that actually. I've taken that on. There's a bit of a history behind that website. I'm doing that for a group of people and keeping that up together. But what that is a platform for information about the constitutional law, about a common law constitution. Doesn't have to, it centres on the British Constitution and the English Constitution, but it really focuses on that. And it's a learning platform. It's got a huge number of resources on there about learning about the English law tradition and why it's, as all the things I've said, why it's so important.
Yep.
So that's that website, and my own website, which is still early days yet. I'm getting into the deeper material, some of the things that we've talked about today, matters of consciousness, natural law, the esoteric, and that is www.lawandalchemy.org, which, as I say, is earlier days for that, and I need to get off my own backside on that one and do more on it. But yeah, you'll find the more esoteric information on that website as well. So keep an eye on that. I do speak fairly regularly out there on the circuit, and I deliver courses whenever I can. When people help me out and find a local venue in their local area, I'm very happy to put on a whole day's course, which I do. I've done that a number of times now, and it's always been a fantastic day. So yeah, so that's what I'm about. But,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Will, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it, and I totally echo. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. And I would direct everybody to Will's websites and possibly his up and coming course. And yeah, and remember to check out the website lawfulrebel.com. There's stacks more on there. And thank you all for listening. I hope you've got some value from this, and do please join us again.
Change you want to see.